Hey, and welcome back to Off-Season Banter Part 2. This is the Duke Wisdom podcast. I'm just chilling, man. I just talked for 32 minutes. You guys are gonna hear this 5 days later. It's pretty cool. So the last episode was kind of an NBA centric episode. Talked Jason Tatum winning the finals, NBA draft, Jared McCain, the whole Kyle Filipowski drama. The kind of re-signings / leavings of that has already happened in free agency of some former Blue Devils, and a little bit of Olympic stuff preview. We'll get more into that as the Olympics starts getting underway this month. But this episode is all about this year's team, this year's squad. And, well, not all about. There's going to be a little bit of a digression in here, but mostly about this year's team. So let's talk about those kind of those scrimmages. So I put out the article that was the Duke Wisdom Network's ranking of all 15 players on this year's roster. Now, I think there are some guys who did their rankings on the list who would have rather have gone back and revisited some of their rankings before I published them, and that might be my bad. The scrimmage was bound to change some things, but I think the real reason I like putting that out is it's fun to go back and revisit those rankings when we do the midseason and when we do the end of season player rankings. So it was interesting, and I'm gonna kind of sit out from just going down and breaking down that list, because I might want to do an episode that gets a little more focused on breaking down that list. But let's talk a little bit about mock drafts. Because I saw, it was reported basically by The Athletic and Sam Vecini that Knueppel was going to be on his first round of his 2025 NBA mock draft, and then one he put out the day after the draft, and he sure was. And not only was he on there, so was Isaiah Evans, and so was Caleb Foster, so was Tyrese Proctor, so was Kaman Malawach, so was Cooper Flagg. So Flagg was there, Malawach, Proctor, Foster, Evans, Knueppel. Could Duke really have 6 first-round picks? And that was just a first-round mock. I've now seen other mock drafts that have Sion James in the second round. And so could Duke really have 7 NBA draft picks, 7, on this team? I don't know. Yes. Yes, because at a point in time, more than 7 of these guys will play in the NBA. Of that, I have no doubt. But will 6 or 7 of them be drafted next year? No, absolutely not. And I think we're getting caught up in the mock draftiness of a year prior when we don't need to be. There are a lot of examples of this in young Duke players who have a lot of potential, but don't necessarily get the touches necessary in that freshman or sophomore year to be a high draft pick. Look at Tyrese Proctor. At this time last year, Tyrese Proctor was a projected lottery pick. That did not pan out this year. Does that mean he's not going to be a first-round pick after this upcoming year? It doesn't, but he wouldn't have been this year. And a similar thing, Wendell Moore, after beginning of his freshman year, going into his freshman year, Wendell Moore, first-round pick. Was he? Absolutely not. Couldn't have gotten drafted. After before his sophomore year, again, we think he's a first-round pick because the tools are there for him to be a first-round pick. Doesn't really have the performance he should have had. Could he have gotten drafted after his sophomore year? Probably not. Then his junior year comes around and he works on that three-point shot. He gets to a position where he is a viable first-round pick. And because the scouts had already picked out the fact that he has the tools to be a first-round pick, he has the skills, he has the physical requirements to be a first-round pick. Now that he's shown the development of his game, he can be a first-round pick. A late one, though, because he's a little older now. But still a first-round pick nonetheless. That's Wendell Moore. Rasheed Suleiman had a similar thing. Not really before his freshman year was he a projected first-round pick, but before his sophomore year he was. But then he disappointed a bit. And then before his junior year, they're like, okay, I think he can still be a first-round pick after this year. And then things really fell off the deep end, and he wasn't able to get to the point Wendell Moore was. So there's 2 sides to that coin. There's they know the NBA skill set is there, and you can take time to develop and still be that first-round pick. Or they know the skill set is there, but things falter off in college, and then you can't get drafted or play in the NBA anymore, like Rashid Suleiman. So it's a double-edged sword. And so Tyrese Proctor, you see it before his freshman season. There's this whole conversation about him as a first-round pick. They love his game. He's an Australian player. He's NBA built as a guard. He's got the NBA skill set. And then it's the sophomore year where they're thinking he could be a really high lottery pick. He could be a first guard option. And then now they're thinking maybe not a first guard option, but he certainly still has the NBA skill set. And so what I think is going to happen is very similar to what happened with Wendell Moore. He's going to have a very successful junior season in which he improves upon his NBA skills, becomes a more confident player, and is ultimately a first-round pick at the end of the 2025 season. I think that's what we're going to see out of Tyrese Proctor. And I bring up this similar curve because of the inclusion of Con Knueppel and Isaiah Evans in mock drafts. Do I think it's impossible that either of them get drafted in the 2025 draft? No, absolutely. One of them could. One of them could have a breakout, really good freshman year and end up being a first round or second round pick in next year's draft. Do I think either of them will be? No. I think what's important is that NBA scouts are identifying Isaiah Evans and Con Knueppel as players who have the necessary physical skill set or just can ball out, because there are questions actually athletically and defensively about Knueppel, but his pure shooting and just his ability to score the ball are phenomenal. And I think I would kind of put that akin to Luke Kennard. There was similar questions about Kennard, but his offensive game was just so alluring that he ended up being a lottery pick. But after his sophomore year is what I want to kind of cap that off with. I don't think there's enough opportunity for Knueppel or for Isaiah Evans to be first round picks or probably even draft picks at all after their freshman season. And the reason for that is when you look at the starting lineup, and this is getting a little bit into the next topic, but when you look at that lineup, it's like we know Tyrese is starting. We know Caleb is starting next to Tyrese. Kaman Malawach has to start, whether he's like totally ready from day one or not, he's going to start because the Duke needs that center. And Cooper Flagg's obviously going to start, and that leaves one spot. And if I had, they're not going to start a freshman in that fifth spot. They're going to start Sion James or they're going to start Malik Brown, almost certainly. And so for me, it's like best case scenario for Knueppel or Evans is starting day one as the seventh man. Okay. Is that really going to lead to them being drafted next season? I don't think so. I really don't. But what's important is, and it's not like just every single 5-star that commits to Duke starts preseason a projected first-round pick. Now, Caleb Foster did last season, and he's again projected as an NBA draft pick. I'll get into him in a second. But Patrick Gongba's not a projected pick, and a lot of that's because of injury history. He's not a projected pick right now. Sean Stewart wasn't supposed to be a first-round pick after at this point last year for the 2024 mocks. Sean Stewart wasn't on it, nor was TJ Power. And it's like, it's not just every 5-star. Some people might think that's the case. But Trevor Keels, and he ended up being a pick, was probably a projected first-round pick around this time prior to his freshman year. And a lot of guys are like that. But those guys typically that are projected first-round picks, they typically end up becoming a draft pick at some point because these scouts, they're no dummies. They can see the skill set that's there. They can see the potential that's there. And it's very clear that NBA scouts are pointing out what they like about Evans and what they like about Knueppel is that they can score the ball, both of them, at very high levels. I think what you would like about Knueppel more, and what I think makes him a more attractive prospect actually, is that he's got a little bit bigger build. He's already put 12 pounds on from the end of high school, and he's grown to 6'7". So he's got larger size. He fits more squarely into a role in the NBA in that he can just be that kind of 3-point marksman. Put him on the wing. He fits easily into today's NBA. Isaiah Evans is a little bit more difficult of a story. He's really skinny. There are those same defensive questions for Evans as there are for Knueppel, but they're not for athleticism reasons. Actually, Evans is quite athletic. It's more so for just build. Like, he's not physically ready to defend in the NBA at all. There are questions about whether he's ready to physically defend at the college level, but he certainly would struggle defensively in the NBA because of his frame. But Evans is an incredibly talented scorer. Scouts see that. And so scouts have put in, right, they got him as a first round pick because on paper he could be. And on paper, Knueppel could be. And on paper, Caleb Foster could be. Just like on paper, he could have been last year. But there were guys that got more attention than him from NBA scouts, namely Jared McCain. And for me, this is Tyrese Proctor's year to make himself a known NBA attraction. It's been rumored and teased for 2 years, and it didn't work out. But now this is his Wendell Moore year. This is the year Tyrese Proctor makes himself that first round pick by being what I think is the second best player on this team. This is his year. Cooper Flagg is without a doubt going to the NBA after this year. So is Malawach. They're both gone. They're both out of here. They're projected top 5 picks. Flagg's almost certainly going to be the first pick in the draft. So you got the two of them. We know they're gone. I think Tyrese Proctor is going to have that year. He's gone. So what else is there? Because there's those 4 other guys that could get drafted. Sion James can't come back, nor can Mason Gillis. So we know Mason Gillis is gone, but he's not going to get drafted. Sion James, for me, is kind of like Harrison Ingram-esque. I think that Sion is going to have a fantastic season at Duke. And I think that he's going to end up probably being a second-round draft selection, like he is currently projected. And I think that second-round status is going to be very much tied to age and an inconsistent three-point shot. Do I think that he deserves to be a second-round pick? No. I think that he's good enough to be a first-round pick, but age and inconsistent shot will drop you out. For me, I think Harrison Ingram was easily a first-round pick in this past draft. He ended up going 48 to the San Antonio Spurs. My brother was quite happy about that as a Spurs fan, and he's also a UNC alum and fan. And so Ingram going 48, that's way too low. 48 is way too low. And Harrison Ingram wasn't even that old. Like, yeah, he was like 21. So Sion's got age on Ingram, and so it's going to be really tough to make a case for him as a first-round pick. It's going to be really tough for him to get drafted at all. But I personally think he'll be good enough to do so. And that's kind of where I think the ball stops rolling for Duke. I think you've got 3 for sure draft picks and then probably a 4th. That's what I'm thinking. I think, Malik Brown will come back for his senior year. You got those 3 other guys. Knueppel, I don't see him being a one and done. I don't see it. I think that there will be a lot more retention and ability to avoid the transfer portal in this year's freshman class than there was last year. That's not to say none of them will transfer. There is a guy that I think will probably transfer after this upcoming season. I'm not going to put that evil on him right now because it's so early. But Knueppel for me is like, I think he's going to have a good freshman year. I think I described him in that article where we ranked the top 15, like expectations for Knueppel should fall somewhere between TJ Power last season and Grayson Allen's national championship performance. So like he's going to be better than Power, I think. I think he's better prepared than TJ Power, but he's not going to quite be that savior Grayson Allen level. I mean, he could be better than Grayson Allen was for the majority of his freshman season, but I don't think he's going to hit the level that Grayson Allen hit in that last game. But he'll be somewhere in between that. And if you're a Duke fan, your hope is that he falls a little bit closer to that national championship game Grayson Allen threshold. And if he does, I think there is a firm and real possibility that he could be in draft discussions at the end of this season. But I don't think he'll leave. I think he will be an NBA draft pick after his like sophomore or junior season. I feel similarly about Isaiah Evans. I think he will not leave or be drafted or be able to be drafted after his freshman season. I think he will, though, after his sophomore or junior season. And that's how I feel about the two of them. For Caleb Foster, I have a similar feeling. I think he's a projected first-round pick. I think it'll be a little bit easier of a sell for Foster to get drafted next year because he'll have more opportunity. He will have played more time for Duke next season than Knueppel or Evans. I mean, he'll be one of the first options offensively, with a lot of people thinking he could be the 3rd best player on the team. So for me, it's like the opportunity's there for Caleb, But I kind of think there will be a lot of focus with Proctor and Flag. I think that Caleb could be a first round pick. I think he could be. I am currently leaning toward I think he will return for a junior season and be the guy as a junior in the backcourt. But, you never know. You never know how these things pan out. Last year, there was a while where they thought Foster was a pick. It kind of got to the point where we're like, well, no, not yet. This year, I think it'll be like he could be, but he can do better. And that's what I think is going to happen. And it'll lead to an eventual return. So that's kind of the early draft discussion that I want to get into. Let's talk about why this Duke team can be better than last year. It's deeper. First of all, well, last year we thought it was going to be like the deepest Duke team ever. And so that's kind of, I want to, play devil's advocate to myself. This team feels deeper because it feels like there's like 9 players on this team that there's just no way they don't pan out, at least to some degree. But also it's every year that we're like, look at how much talent, look how deep this team is. In reality, this team will play 7 or 8 guys at the end of the year, best case scenario. Who are those 7 or 8? We know Proctor's one of them. We know Foster's one of them. I think Sion James confidently is one. I think Malik Brown is confidently. Cooper Flag is. Malawach is. That's 6. So for me, it's like there's 1 or 2 spots left for who's going to play some serious minutes. And for me, it's like those spots probably go one of them to Evans or Knueppel, probably not both. And then probably Mason Gillis because of his veteran status. So I think Gillis is guy 7. And then the question mark is like Knueppel and Evans. I think whoever loses out that battle kind of might play some spot minutes at the end of the season, kind of like Jalen Blakes did. But by March, there's just not enough space for that many players. And I unfortunately think Gongba and Harris are going to get left on the chopping block, especially Harris. Gongba could find his way on the floor for a multitude of reasons. One is that he's really the only other guy who can comfortably play a legitimate center position other than Malawach. You can play Malik Brown there, but it's kind of weird and it's not a great fit at the 5. So, if Malawach needs a breather, Patrick Gongba kind of has to come in if you want to keep playing a traditional 5. And then there's the whole situation, nightmare situation, knock on wood. If Malawach gets hurt, who has to start you can just play Malik Brown there, but you're going to have to play Gongba at some point. So Gongba can easily step into that 8-man rotation through circumstance, without a doubt. It's going to be a lot more difficult for Darren Harris to do that. I think it's interesting, though. I think having so many talented players is going to make it interesting with how the rotation develops throughout the season. But I think what really sets this team apart from last year, one is a blank slate for the most part, getting 2 guys back who I think are very dedicated and very good players in the backcourt who should be team captains, and they're the backcourt players who are supposed to be kind of the floor generals anyway. I think that's important, 1. 2, I think having more veteran leadership. Like, people talked about the roster retention from John's first year to second, but a lot of that retention, besides Jeremy Roach, was really among like sophomores, like Mark Mitchell, Tyrese Proctor, Kyle Filipowski. They're still underclassmen, and Caleb Foster's still an underclassman, but Tyrese isn't. And then also Sion James, when we're talking about a significant contributor in James, a significant contributor in Brown, and a more significant contributor in Gillis than I think Ryan Young was. So in the first 2 years of this and the last year of the K era, we had guys like Theo John and Ryan Young. All those grad transfers this year outside of Cameron Sheffield are going to contribute more than those guys did. So though that veteran leadership is not just present, it is active. And I think that's a really big difference between last year's team and this year's team. Also, a little bit of that rumored locker room drama is gone, at least hopefully, cross the fingers. And then this freshman class is just full of killers. You have to have a guy that is just phenomenally like, how do you stop this guy to be a national championship team unless you're just the most well-rounded team ever? Most Duke, the last Duke team to win the national title had that. They had Jaleel Okafor. And then the last Duke team to be 1 seed had that. They had Zion Williamson. Cooper Flag is that guy. And then I think Kaman Malawach can be that guy. I don't think he will be next year necessarily. I think he'll be more of that as an NBA player. But Duke has two guys that are just stupid talented as freshmen, and then four other really talented freshmen, three really capable transfers who are going to play some of the biggest roles transfers have ever played at Duke, immediately at least. I think when I think transfers at Duke, I think the most successful ones being Rashawn McLeod, Dante Jones, Seth Curry, and Rodney Hood. But we didn't see their impact immediately the next season. We had to sit there and watch them redshirt a year. Now we get to see three guys come in and have the most immediate, instant, high impact of any transfers at Duke. And I think that's really cool. So that, coupled with the return of Foster and Proctor, coupled with the freshmen, these three dynamics all sort of coming together into one melting pot to create this weird but oddly really good team. And I think that they're underrated preseason, and I think a lot of the successful Duke teams are. 2010 was ranked like 8th preseason, 8th or 9th, I don't remember exactly. I think it was 9th preseason for Duke in 2022 when they made the Final Four, and it'll probably be around that same ranking this year. I think oftentimes when they're ranked 1st or 2nd, it just doesn't, like, that team's not going to do it because you're ranking them there mostly off of just like the really high ranked talent plus like some returning players that, I don't know. There's just something that doesn't work out. But there's something about being in that around like 8 that normally works out real well for Duke. And I think that's where they're going to be this season. And I think they're in a position to succeed very much so this season as well.
Want to join a community of Duke accounts publishing news, theories, and predictions on Duke athletics? Join the Duke Wisdom Network. Just go to dukewisdom.org/join network today and fill out the form with your name and social media. Or you can DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram. Become a part of the community of Duke fans publishing their takes today. Again, that's dukewisdom.org/join network or DM at Duke_wisdom on Twitter or Instagram.
So I talked about a digression a bit earlier on in the episode, and I'm going to get into that right now to end the episode. Actually, I said I'd have it somewhere in here. I'm going to end with it. So recently on Theo Penson's podcast, there was a special guest, Armando Bacot. You might be thinking, Ben, why are you talking about a UNC podcast on here? Well, if you're on Twitter, you probably know why and where I'm going with this. Armando Bacot talked about how he grew up a monster Duke fan, right? He grew up a monster Duke fan and how he wanted, Duke to win when he was like in high school and stuff like that. And Theo Penson talked about how he grew up a Duke fan and how when he was at that Austin Rivers game winner and he was so happy that Duke had won that game. And we know that Kobe White grew up a Duke fan. Caleb Love grew up a Duke fan. So many. I think Kennedy Meeks grew up a Duke fan, if I do remember correctly. So many of these Carolina guys grew up Duke fans. And I find that really funny, right? I find it really funny. But I knew about Armando for a while because Armando used to follow me on Twitter for a long time. And I always thought Armando Bacot was going to go to Duke. I think that 24/7 Sports crystal ball for him was Duke for the longest time. But then it became clear that Duke had prioritized Vernon Carey. And so they got Carey and not Bacot. And there might be some Carolina fans that are like, man, wish you would have had Bacot. I'm like, dude, I would have taken Armando Bacot. He turned out to be a great player, fantastic player, and a really cool guy off the court. He really is. But funny guy to talk to as well. But you kind of like, would I prefer to have had, like, if I had to choose one or the other, I'm picking Vernon Carey. And I truly believe Vernon Carey in that 1 year was better than Bacot ever got. That might be I might receive some hate from some Carolina fans. I don't think Armando ever got better in 5 years than Vernon Carey was in his freshman. And if Vernon Carey had, and Armando even said that he named like the top 4 or 5 players that he ever played against in college, and Vernon Carey was one of those guys. Vernon Carey's criminally underrated. I talked about that on the 2020s ranking episode. But if Vernon Carey had played 5 years, he'd be one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. So it's just kind of weird how this recruiting thing works, where you've got these guys who are lifelong Duke fans, But Duke ultimately picks another guy in the recruiting trail who plays the same position. And that guy has to then make, while he has the Duke offer, has to make the decision that's best for him. And that decision ends up being Carolina a lot of the times. And you saw it with Bacot. The best decision for Armando Bacot was to go to Carolina rather than to go to Duke. He would have sat behind Vernon, and then he would have sat behind Mark probably. Or it would have had to have really battled with Mark Williams. And so I think it's interesting. And I would have taken Vernon 10 times out of 10. And then you go to that Theo Pinson example. I thought for a while during Theo Pinson's recruitment that he would end up going to Duke. But ultimately, Coach K prioritized Justice Winslow. And people would be like, well, yeah, there might be some confidence. Well, Theo Pinson, ended up being a national champion. You're going to regret not getting him. No, because they prioritized Justice Winslow, and Justice Winslow was so good already that he delivered them a national championship, helped deliver them a national championship in his freshman year. Didn't take till a junior year for him. And it's like if Justice Winslow played 4 years, again, he'd be one of the greatest Duke basketball players ever, probably. And so that's that. And then the Caleb Love example is kind of a weird one because Duke actually probably more so didn't really recruit Caleb. They didn't really recruit Caleb, and they zoned in on Jeremy Roach more so. And so would you rather have Roach or Love? That's a tough question because Caleb Love's had more success as a player, but he's also been way more up and down. Jeremy Roach became a much more consistent player, but I wouldn't necessarily say a better one. So that one's kind of an odd one. Kennedy Meeks is a scenario where Duke kind of took really, really, really honed in on like Jabari Parker and then on Shimi Ojale. And it's like, well, if getting Kennedy Meeks had even remotely thrown a wrench in getting Jabari Parker, you clearly abandon ship and go get Jabari Parker. So there's always the thing. It's like Duke ruins all these guys that they liked him, and Carolina takes them and molds them into champions. It's all right. Yeah, maybe. But like, whether these Duke guys that I just mentioned became champions or not, had they played 4 years, I have no doubt they would have. And they were you just take the better player, and Duke does. They take the better player. But you're like, well, then why doesn't Duke have more championships? Well, because they don't stay past a year. And then you can say, well, that's a problem, and maybe it is. And maybe it is, and that's where the discussion comes in. But, I'm just talking myself in circles right now. I thought that was an interesting comment. But Armando Bacot had another interesting comment on that podcast with Theo Pinson, where he talked about he wanted Duke to win in the Elite Eight game against NC State because he knew that had Duke won, Duke would have lost to UConn or Purdue in the Final Four. I think Purdue would have beat Duke in the Final Four personally with ease, actually. But had Duke gone to the Final Four, he said, well, their fans pretty much would have been like, cool, Final Four, and then forgotten about it because they didn't win the national championship, and that's the standard at Duke. But NC State getting a Final Four is like something they won't shut up about for like 20 years, maybe even longer than that. And he thought that was annoying. But a lot of State fans have used that as evidence to be like, ESPN has just made this Duke-UNC rivalry up to be something it's not. And State's the true primary rival of UNC. And I'm like, get out of here, man. You made it to one Final Four. We gave you an inch, a.k.a. one single Final Four in 40 years. And you're trying to take a mile out here, man. Like, come on, dude. Like, come on. You cannot be serious. Do you know the record between NC State and Carolina? Like, yeah, we're finally, I think Carolina fans, Duke fans have been acknowledging this for a while. But Carolina fans are finally starting to acknowledge that, okay, yeah, State's a real rival because we are getting actually mad that State's winning. It does get under our skin and we don't like it and we're bantering and fighting. And okay, you're a rival then. And it's very clear that State is a rival of Carolina, but they're not more of a rival. Like, what are we doing here? The reason Armando said that is because he doesn't want to deal with State fans being more annoying than Duke fans, one. And two, he's a former Duke fan. That point can't be lost on us when a guy's talking about that. So, it's just crazy. And there's also that point from State fans that's like all the Duke and Carolina fans, or not fans, players are, friends off the court. And I'm like, yeah, because it's like they just got into it. It's not that deep for them. It's a game deep, really. I mean, they might hate Carolina, but again, they probably hate the Carolina fans. And the Carolina players probably hate the Duke fans, because when they go play each other, like Jeremy Roach isn't like, he's not like saying the outlandish stuff that the Duke students are saying, right? It's the fans that are saying ridiculous things about Armando and RJ. It isn't the guys that they're playing against. And, likewise, when the Duke guys walk into the Dean Dome, it's not Hubert Davis and RJ Davis saying crazy stuff about them. It's the Carolina fans. And so it's I think for me, it's always been a similar thing, even before I became a professional writer, a professional journalist, even before I became a UNC student. For me as a Duke fan growing up, it was always, I didn't hate the players. Not really. I hated that they played at Carolina, but I didn't hate them, right? Like I didn't hate, who are some good examples? Marcus Page. I never hated Marcus Page. How could you? I didn't hate Kobe White. I didn't hate Justin Jackson. I think it's tough to hate those guys, actually. I think they're good dudes. And so it was just like, I didn't hate Harrison Barnes, even though he didn't go to Duke, and was thought that he was gonna. I didn't hate Tyler Zeller, but like it was, I hated having to hear from the Carolina fans that I was around every day after Duke lost. It was just a miserable existence. That's what I hated about Carolina. It's the fan rivalry. I didn't hate the players. I think it's more actually on the side of Carolina fans hate more Duke players. And that's because everybody hates Duke players. I think that's more so outside of the realm of Duke Carolina. I think that people just hate Duke players. If people hate a Duke player, it's everybody. It's not just Carolina fans. The thing about State, again, it's like they don't really hate the players. Like, I don't know how many Carolina fans are out there like genuinely talking about, I hate DJ Horn. Like I hate CJ Leslie. Who's saying that? I hate Cat Barber. No one's saying that. But what they're saying and what Armando Bacot is saying is he doesn't like you guys getting under the skin. And I think they don't like State fans getting under their skin just as much as Duke fans. State fans just weren't allowed to get under their skin until they finally actually did something. That's the difference of what's happening right now versus what happened for 40 years prior. State fans can talk crap right now because they had success temporarily. So it feels the same. But the rivalry's not the same because State's not consistently successful, one. And two, because Duke is. And the Duke-Carolina games are always good. That's what makes it a rivalry. You're always on your toes because you never know when you're going to have to go back to work the next day and hear from whoever that's a Carolina fan about how the Duke boys dropped the ball, how they lost, and they're never going to let you hear the end of it. And that's why it sucked. But when it comes to Carolina State, it's like that. The Carolina guy doesn't usually hold that much stock in that game because they know for the most part they're going to win like 9 times out of 10. But this year, they got some bragging rights. Their fans became annoying, as Duke fans often are to Carolina fans, and Carolina fans often are to Duke fans. They had something to back up their annoyance, and that's what makes a fan versus fan rivalry, and that's what makes it good, and that's what makes it fun. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, State fans. It's Duke versus Carolina. Come on now. Thanks so much for listening, guys. It's been a blast. We'll talk more off season as we go, but very happy to had this episode going up, and make sure to follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening, and I'll talk to you guys later.